Welcome, guys, to another midnight story. But tonight is not like the others. You shouldn't have come here. The shadows are watching your every step. The wind whispers secrets you were never meant to hear. Every creak, every rustle could be your last dot. Do you feel it? The darkness moving? Just behind you. Welcome to the Midnight Story.
8 shocking true experiences in isolated Appalachian churches. Horror stories. Story 1. The choir that sang without breath. I was 17 when I first heard the name The Singing Place. It came from an old man who ran a bait shop near the south end of Cole County. My buddy Drew and I had gone in there for sunflower seeds and Dr. Peppers after a long day hiking Cinder Ridge, and the old man, sunken-eyed, maybe 90, had glanced at the mud on our boots and muttered, "You didn't go up past the shale ledge, did you? Where is the old church?" I told him we hadn't. I lied. We hadn't yet. But the moment he said the old church, Drew gave me a look. We both knew what we were doing that night. That's how it always starts, isn't it? One careless whisper from someone older and more scared than we understand at the time. We laugh it off, turn it into a dare, and head straight for the thing that should have stayed untouched. I wish I could say we were just being stupid kids, but I think there was something else at work. Something that wanted us to come up that ridge. The church sat half a mile past the shale ledge, buried behind thick pine and crooked rock formations. The trail narrowed until it disappeared completely, and if you didn't know what to look for, you'd pass it without knowing anything was there. The first time we saw it, it looked more like a lump in the trees than a building. The roof sagged. The paint had peeled off in long, sun-bleached strips. A bell tower, half rotted and covered in moss, leaned just a bit too far to the left, but the structure still stood, still waiting. We came back later that night. It was me, Drew, and Beth. She'd heard us talking about it in school and asked if she could tag along. Said her grandmother used to talk about a church that sings, and how her uncle refused to go near it after coming back from Vietnam. That should have been enough to scare her off. Should have been enough to scare all of us off. We brought flashlights but barely used them. The moon was high and bright, lighting the ridge in that cold, metallic way that makes everything look dead. We didn't say much on the way up. Something about the air. It was thinner than usual and carried no sound. Even the crickets shut up when we crossed into the clearing. The front doors of the church were swollen and splintered, but not locked. We had to push hard to get them open. The inside smelled like rot and iron. The pews stretched long and crooked down each side of a narrow aisle, facing a pulpit draped in what used to be white cloth. Behind it, a warped wooden cross leaned at an angle, like someone had tried to pull it free and gave up halfway. At first, we thought the place was empty. Then Drew whispered, "Do you see that?" The pews weren't empty. Every single one was filled. Maybe 24 people sat there, facing forward, backs straight. They didn't move, didn't breathe. Their skin looked almost waxy, pale grey with a sheen like candlelight, and their mouths open, wide, as if frozen in mid-song, eyes glazed and lifeless, but they weren't decomposing. No smell of death, just stillness. Beth stepped closer. I grabbed her arm, but she shook me off. "They're mannequins," she whispered, though she didn't sound convinced. That's when the sound began. It started soft, barely there. A single note, like breath through a rusted pipe. Then another, then harmony. Low, distant, rising from the floorboards or the ceiling or the air itself. It grew into a hymn. Not one of us had touched a thing. The song moved through the chapel like smoke, wrapping around us, bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. That hymn. My grandmother used to hum it when she'd peel apples by the kitchen window. I hadn't heard it since her funeral, but at that moment, I knew the melody. I knew the rhythm, knew every damn word like I'd been singing it all my life. The figures in the pews stayed still, but the song felt like it was coming from them. The shape of their mouths matched the words. Beth stepped into the aisle. I called her name quietly, but she didn't turn, just kept walking toward the pulpit like something was pulling her by a string. Halfway down, she stopped. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed hard on the wood. Drew ran after her. I hesitated. Something in my chest tightened, like all the air in the place had been sucked out. My ears rang. My flashlight flickered and died. When I finally stepped forward, it felt like I was walking underwater. The air had gone thick, hard to move through. The hymn kept playing. Calm. Steady. Relentless. Drew was kneeling beside Beth, shaking her, whispering her name over and over. She wasn't unconscious. Her eyes were open, but wide and fixed, like she was listening to something far away. Then she started mouthing the words. No voice, just lips forming syllables in perfect time with the hymn. Drew froze. She's singing, he whispered. She doesn't know it. She's not breathing. I tried to pull her up, but the moment I touched her shoulder, I felt it. Cold, deep, and wrong. Like pressing my hand to a grave that hadn't settled yet. I recoiled. And the hymn shifted. Minor now. Darker. The tempo slowed, notes bending just slightly, enough to make the tune unfamiliar. That's when the figures in the pews began to sway. Not much. Just a little back and forth, like grass in the wind. Their mouths still open, still silent, but moving. Drew let go of Beth and scrambled back. I turned to run, but the doors were gone. Not closed. Gone. Where they had been was just a wall. Blank wood, smooth and clean, like no door had ever been there. I started to panic. Not full-on scream panic, but the kind where your thoughts jam up and your limbs feel like they're not yours. I kept turning, looking for another exit, a window, something, but the world had folded in around us. The church was no longer just a building, it was a mouth. The hymn stopped. Silence dropped like a hammer. Beth went limp. The figures froze mid-sway. I stood there too afraid to breathe, listening. Then, from behind the pulpit, I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, heavy. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt them. I felt him. He wasn't walking toward us. He was walking along the back wall, behind the figures. The sound of boots on old wood. I remember the way it echoed, soft, deliberate, like whoever it was knew exactly how much sound to make, to keep your heart at the edge of breaking. Beth gasped. One sharp inhale, and her body jolted like she'd just been shocked. Drew caught her. She clung to him, sobbing, whispering something I couldn't understand. I turned back toward the pulpit, and I saw a shadow, not a full figure, just an outline, tall, shoulders too broad, head slightly tilted, standing behind the cross, watching. I didn't wait. I grabbed Beth's other arm and pulled. Drew didn't argue. We didn't speak. We just moved. The church seemed to stretch with every step, like we weren't getting closer to the wall, just deeper into the thing. Then, with no warning, the door was there again. Open. I don't remember going through it, just remember falling forward into grass and dirt. Cold air hit us like a slap. The night sounds came rushing back, crickets, wind, the distant hoot of an owl. We ran, didn't stop until the shale gave way to gravel, and gravel gave way to the road. Beth didn't speak for 3 days. When she did, it was only one word. Stop. Drew moved away 2 months later. I wouldn't say why, just packed his truck and left. I heard he lives in Indiana now. No woods, no hills, just flat farmland and sky. As for me, I tried to forget. Tried to chalk it up to teenage adrenaline and bad judgment, but then, A year later, I heard that hymn again, at the gas station, on the radio. Some bluegrass cover piped through the ceiling speakers. Bringing in the sheaves, bringing in the sheaves. My hands went numb. My chest locked up like I'd been underwater too long. I looked behind me, expecting to see the man, the shadow, something. But there was nothing. Still, I felt it, that same watching, that same silence waiting just beneath the noise. Like the hymn had never truly stopped, just got quiet for a while. I don't go near Cinder Ridge anymore. And when I hear that song, even the first note, I shut it off. Doesn't matter where I am, doesn't matter who's around. I shut it off because I know what follows. Stillness, mouths open, breathless. Story 2, Baptism in the Wrong River. It was the summer after high school when Eli said he wanted to get baptized. He wasn't a church kid, neither of us were. We went when we had to, when Ma or Aunt Donna dragged us in by the collar. But something had changed in him that June. He stopped going out with friends, spent more time in his room with the door cracked, reading a little black Bible he found in a box of his daddy's things. Said he felt called. That was the word he used. Called. It was hot that week, thick with humidity that turned your skin sticky before noon. I remember because we spent most of our afternoons on the porch, chewing sunflower seeds and waiting for any breeze to roll down from the hills. That's when he told me about the preacher. Said he met him by accident up in Brush County, way out past where the pavement ends and the logging roads take over. The man had a voice. Like syrup over thunder, Eli said. Told him about a creek that never ran dry. Said the water there was touched, clean enough to wash the inside of a man. Now, I don't know what got into me that made me go along with it. Maybe it was the way Eli looked at me, like he'd already seen something I hadn't, and it was only a matter of time before I did too. We borrowed his daddy's truck, an old green Ford that coughed smoke on the uphills. Took us nearly an hour to find the place, crawling through switchbacks and brush-choked turns. There wasn't a road sign for miles, just trees, dense and leaning, like they didn't want us there. The church looked like it hadn't seen people in years. Boards nailed over windows, white paint peeled to grey, the bell tower half caved in. But there was a stillness to it. Not the dead kind, but the listening kind, like it had been waiting. We parked in the tall grass and followed a trail of trampled ferns behind the church. Sure enough, just like Eli said, there was a creek. It ran narrow and slow, but deeper than it looked, water as dark as molasses and cold enough to turn your skin red just by touching it. And it stank, not like rot, more like pennies and burnt matches, metallic. The preacher was already there. I don't know how to explain him correctly. He didn't look old, not really, but his skin had that stretched, smooth look, like he'd been pickled in time. Eyes too clear. No whites, just this fogged grey colour that made me uneasy. He didn't say hello, just nodded at Eli and stepped into the creek like he didn't feel the cold at all. Eli followed. I remember thinking he moved like someone in a dream. Not hurried, not slow, just inevitable. I stayed on the bank, arms crossed, feeling something wrong crawl up the back of my neck. The preacher spoke a blessing. At least, I think it was a blessing. It didn't sound like scripture. The cadence was off. Strange pauses. And the words. Some of them were English, some weren't. Eli knelt in the water, hands clasped. The preacher placed a hand on his forehead and pushed him under. The bubbles rose, thick and oily. He held him there too long. I nearly shouted, but then Eli surfaced, gasping, eyes wide. He looked straight at me. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. He just climbed out of that water and walked right past me, soaking and shivering. We didn't talk much on the way back. I asked him how he felt. He said, clean. But his voice was flat, like the word didn't mean anything. The change didn't come all at once. It took weeks. At first, he just got quiet, would sit on the porch late into the night, whispering verses I didn't recognize, not psalms, not gospel. The words were jagged, off rhythm. Some he repeated over and over. There is no dryness in him. The well has no end. The river bends toward the soul. I wrote them down once. Tried searching them in my Bible app. Nothing. Then he stopped eating. Said food felt like stones in his stomach. Aunt Donna cried the first time he refused her cornbread. He just smiled and said, I'm already full. I caught him one night, standing barefoot in the rain, head tilted back, mouth open like he was drinking the sky. I tried pulling him inside. He said, you don't get it yet, but you will. By August, we knew something was wrong. Real wrong. Aunt Donna took him to a doctor in town. They ran blood tests, checked for infections and parasites. Nothing. Perfectly healthy. I just wouldn't speak to them. Wouldn't look at anyone but the windows. Said he was listening for the river. I thought maybe taking him back would help. I loaded the truck one morning while he sat on the porch humming some slow, tuneless thing. He didn't argue, just climbed in barefoot, wet footprints on the floorboard. We drove the same route, same switchbacks, same landmarks. But when we got there was nothing. The church was gone. No foundation, no trail, no clearing. The forest was solid, thick with pine and laurel. I walked in circles for an hour, trying to find where the building should have been. Eli just stood at the tree line, smiling like he'd known it would happen. It doesn't need to be here anymore, he said. We didn't talk on the drive home. He didn't sleep that night. I heard him on the porch again, whispering. This time I listened closer. He wasn't praying. He was repeating names I didn't recognize. Some I did. Ours, our neighbors, people from school. Whispered like a roll call. And after each name he said, you'll see. The last time I saw him was a week later. I'd woken up just before dawn and found the front door wide open, porch light swinging in the breeze. He stood at the edge of the woods, still barefoot, wearing nothing but jeans. His arms were spread, palms up like he was offering something. The trees swayed, but there was no wind. He turned to me, smiled wider than I'd ever seen. We're all getting baptized, he said, sooner or later. Then he stepped into the woods. We searched for days. Dogs, drones, volunteers. Not a single sign. Not a footprint. Not a broken twig. It was like the forest just took him. They put his picture up at the general store. Folks talk about him with soft voices now, like he's already dead, even though nobody ever turned up. Aunt Donna moved away, said the house didn't feel like hers anymore. Sometimes, when I'm out by the old creek bed behind the farm, I swear I hear singing, not loud, just beneath the crickets and wind. A low hum, wet, slow, the kind of sound that makes your ribs ache. And every now and then I catch myself whispering names I haven't thought of in years. I never asked to be part of this. But I think Eli was right. We're all getting baptized. Sooner or later. Story 3, The Bell That Never Rang. There's an old coal road out near Hazard that most folks forgot about. It doesn't show up on maps anymore. It climbs too steep and crumbles in too many places for any real use. But I used to hike it on weekends when I needed quiet, when the world got too heavy and the house too loud. The hills out that way have a kind of hush you don't find elsewhere. Like even the birds think twice before speaking. I liked that kind of silence. I first noticed the church one October afternoon. It wasn't there before. Not in any of my walks, not in any of the stories my grandfather used to tell about the hollers. Just appeared, tucked between a stand of black pines, about a quarter-mile off the main trail. It was small. White paint blistered off the wood in long strips, shutters hanging like loose teeth. The steeple leaned a bit, its bell rusted solid, or so I thought. I stood there for a long while, just staring. Something about it felt still, but not in the peaceful way I usually found in those woods. This was a different stillness, the kind that presses against your skin, just beneath the breeze. I didn't go on that day. I turned around, walked back to my truck, and told myself it was just an old building someone had started to fix and abandoned halfway through. That part of the world's full of forgotten things. Houses with trees growing through the roof, barns with no floors. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, not exactly. Just this itch behind my ribs, like I'd left something undone. So the next day, I packed a thermos and set back out. Sunlight filtered through clouds, low and heavy, the kind that make it hard to tell what time of day it is. I followed the trail, cut through the pines, and there it was. Same place, same lean, only now. Smoke, thin wisps rising from the chimney like it had just been lit. My first thought was squatters, or maybe someone restoring it after all. I crept up, boots crunching over brittle needles. The front doors were open, wide, like it was expecting me. Inside, the air was warm, and not from sunlight. There was a fire burning in the little stove tucked behind the pulpit. Candles lined the windowsills and altar, fat white ones that hadn't melted far. On the altar sat a fresh loaf of bread, still steaming faintly. The smell was off. Not bad, but off. Like bread, yes, but with a faint tang, something sour just beneath the crust. That's when I noticed the bell. It was swinging, hard, like someone had yanked the rope with fury and let it go. Back and forth, high enough to catch the eye, iron mouth yawning open at each pass, but no sound. None. The silence it cut through was complete. My ears rang just from the absence of noise. I backed away slowly, heart thumping harder than it ought to. I don't remember leaving, just that I was outside suddenly, standing in the cold, staring up at the steeple. That night, I dreamed. In the dream, I stood inside the church same as before, but it was full now. Not with people, but with presence. Candles flickered without wind. The bell swung above me, and this time it rang, deep and slow, a funeral toll. Each note felt like it came from inside my chest, not outside. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stared as the bread on the altar rose and cracked open, steaming in time with the bell. When I woke up, I was soaked in sweat, and the echo of that bell still rang behind my eyes. The next morning, something was wrong. Our farm's small, 2 acres of sloped pasture and a fenced chicken run. My wife, Jo, had gone into town early, so it was just me when I stepped outside and noticed the quiet. Not unusual on foggy mornings, but this was different. I walked the perimeter. The chicken coop was empty. The gate is wide open. No feathers, no signs of struggle. The barn, too. Stall doors swung out, feed untouched. Our goat Millie gone without a trace. Every gate, every latch, every barrier. Open, no damage. Just unlocked. I called Jo, told her to pick up extra locks. Maybe someone was messing around, trying to scare us. We didn't talk about the bell. I wasn't ready to admit that part out loud yet. But in the back of my head, the sound kept playing, like a memory you can't rub out. Over the next week, it happened again. A cat from the neighbor's barn, then a whole string of coyotes that had been scavenging our compost. Gone. Each time I heard the bell that night, never loud, just enough to notice. And each time, something vanished by morning. No blood, no mess, just absence. I stopped hiking after that. I stopped sleeping, mostly. Every night, I'd lie in bed, waiting. And almost like clockwork, sometime around 3, I'd hear it. Not through the walls, not through the air, inside, like the ring of a tuning fork pressed behind my eyes. I finally broke one night. Jo had gone to visit her sister for a long weekend, and I was alone. The night was thick, sky the color of bruises, moon drowned behind clouds. When the bell rang, I stood up, pulled on my boots, grabbed the old lantern from the porch. I told myself I wasn't going there, I just needed air, I needed to see the sky. But my feet had other plans. The trail unfolded before me, pines parting with a whisper, and before I knew it, the church stood in front of me again. Only this time, it was new. Paint white and clean, windows clear, steeple straight. The bell tower gleamed faintly in the dark, and it was still swinging, no rope attached, just motion without cause. I stepped inside. The pews were full. Folks sat shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, hands folded. No one looked at me. No one moved. They weren't breathing. I walked the aisle, feet thudding soft on the wood. Every face was familiar. My old schoolteacher, my barber, my great-uncle Roy, who died 10 years prior, all still, all silent. On the altar the bread had grown, split wide and steaming like fresh earth. The candles burned tall and steady, even as the bell above clanged louder than ever. My ears didn't hurt, my soul did. I turned to run. Outside, the world had changed. The trees were gone, replaced by open hills rolling and pale, dotted with figures, still figures, all facing the church, all waiting. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice had left me. I don't know how I got home. I woke up on the porch, lanterns cracked at my feet, our knees bloodied. Jo found me like that. I didn't say a word. I just stood, walked to the barn and started sealing everything. New locks, bolted hinges, nailed boards across every gate. That was a year ago. I still live here, still tend the land. But I don't hike anymore. I don't sleep much either. Every few weeks the bell rings at night, and every time something goes missing. A neighbor's dog, a woman 2 towns over, just gone. Her porch light is still on. Her car is still warm. I think the church calls what it needs. I think the bell marks its taking. Not death, not exactly, just removal. Something deeper, quieter, and I think one day I'll hear that bell loud and clear, outside this time, not in dreams. And then it'll be my name, carved into silence. Story 4. The preacher behind the pulpit window. We used to take the long way into town when I was little, mostly because the truck's brakes weren't worth a damn, and my grandpa didn't trust the main hill. That road took us past Hellbriar Hollow, a stretch of land that even the deer seemed to avoid. Thicker woods, colder air. Always felt like you'd crossed some invisible fence when you got near it. And right near the bend, tucked into the ridge above the tree line, sat the old stone chapel. No sign, no drive-up path, just grey rock and a bell tower that leaned a little more every year. Folks said it'd been abandoned since the 40s, maybe even longer. There wasn't much history left to check. The roof had moss on it thick as carpet, and the windows were caked with dust. But I remember looking up through the windshield, time after time, and always seeing the same thing. A man standing at the pulpit window, not moving, just watching. Dressed in black, head tilted just enough to make your stomach turn. I never told my mum. She was nervous enough driving those hills. But I did ask Grandpa once. He just said, "That man never left," then lit a cigarette and stared at the road like he hadn't said anything strange at all. I figured it was a trick of the light, a shadow in the glass. I'd try to catch it again and again, even leaned across the seat once when we passed real slow. Same black suit, same posture, same emptiness behind the eyes. You couldn't see much detail, just enough to know it wasn't right. When I turned 13, I decided to hike up there myself. I told my folks I was camping with a friend, packed a lunch, and took off before sunrise. The air that morning was thick with dew and bird call, but the closer I got to Hellbriar Hollow, the quieter everything got. Like the land itself was holding its breath. There was no trail to the chapel, just a mess of roots and thorns, all grown around a slope of shale and ivy. It took me 2 hours and half the skin off my legs to reach it. Up close, the chapel looked worse than I expected. Cracked stones. The roof caved on one side. The front doors had been nailed shut with rusted iron, and the hinges had bent clean off, but it smelled like someone had been there recently. Not strong, just a trace of oil. Wax, maybe. I walked the perimeter, brushing aside spiderwebs, stepping over broken flagstones and dead branches. I found a small window on the east side, too high to see into easily, so I stacked some rocks and pulled myself up just enough to peer inside. It was empty. Dust thick enough to write in. The pews collapsed in places. Ivy curled in through a crack in the wall. No candles, no footprints, no sign of life. I laughed, out loud. I felt stupid for getting so worked up all those years. Just an old ruin. But when I turned to climb down, I glanced at the window again, not through it, at it, and I saw him. Standing behind me, not in the chapel, in the reflection, black suit, head tilted, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting. My breath caught. I turned fast, nearly slipped off the rocks. No one there, just trees and wind. But the image in the glass lingered for half a second too long. Like it didn't want to leave, I ran. Hard, didn't even take the slope, just barreled through saplings and rocks. Tore my shin open on something sharp, didn't stop till I hit the bottom trail, panting and shaking. I told myself I imagined it, that it was a shadow, a tree, anything but a man. I didn't go near that chapel again, not until last spring. I was back visiting Mom after her surgery, helping her around the house, fixing up the porch rail, that kind of thing. One morning, I went into town early for eggs, drove the old route without thinking. Fog rolled in as I rounded the bend, and out of habit, I looked up at the ridge. He was there. Same window, same stillness. 30 years hadn't changed a thing. I almost wrecked the truck trying to keep my eyes on the road. My hands shook the whole way to the market. I didn't say a word to anyone. But that night, while brushing my teeth, I caught movement in the bathroom mirror. Just a flicker, like someone behind me, right behind. I turned fast. Nothing. It happened again 2 nights later. Then again, always the same. A flicker, a shape, a black suit where no one should be. It didn't matter what room I was in, bathroom, kitchen window, even the side mirror on my truck, and it was always behind me, never beside. Never in front, just off to the edge, enough to freeze your blood before it vanished. I started covering mirrors, any reflective surface, taped paper over them. Told Mom it was to stop the glare. She didn't question it, but I couldn't sleep. Not really. I'd wake up to the sound of shoes on old wood. The floor creaked in a rhythm that didn't match mine. I'd hear faint whispers, like the end of a sermon heard through a wall. Always too far to catch the words, always too close to ignore. Then one morning I found a single dead moth on my pillow, wings folded like praying hands. I didn't think much of it, but the next night I found 3, all facing the same way. By the end of the week, they were in the sink, the fridge, my boots, all pointing towards something. I couldn't take it. I drove back to the chapel just before dusk, armed with a crowbar and a flashlight. I didn't care how foolish it was. I needed to know if someone was living there. If this whole thing had a rational explanation. Some squatter, some sick trick my mind was playing. The air was colder than it should have been. Every step toward that building felt like walking into a pond, still, wet, and slow. I pried open one of the front doors. It didn't fight me, just creaked aside like it had been waiting. Inside, it looked cleaner. Dust was still there, but the altar had been cleared. The floor swept. A single candle sat unlit in the window, and the pulpit, empty. No figure, no preacher. I turned in a slow circle. My flashlight caught the far wall, then the ceiling, and then landed on a mirror. An old, cracked thing hung above the altar like some forgotten relic, and in it, behind my shoulder, stood the preacher. This time he moved, his hand lifted, slowly, like underwater, and pointed. Not at me, past me. There was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, it was empty. Just me, pale and shivering. But I could still feel him behind me, even when I left. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't been right since. I see him in reflections, yes, but not always clearly. Sometimes just a fingertip on the glass, a shoulder, a tie clip. He's closer now. Doesn't vanish as quickly. I don't tell people. Who would believe it? But it's real. He's real. I don't think he's trying to hurt me. I think he's waiting. And sometimes, when I brush my teeth at night and catch him in the mirror just behind my left ear, I think, maybe he's not waiting for me. Maybe he's waiting for someone else to look. Story 5. The Revival That Never Ended. I was headed down through Flint's Crossing last fall, coming back from an overnight haul of building supplies for my cousin's new place outside Hazard. Nothing urgent, just old paneling and some drywall, but I liked taking the back roads. Always have. You don't see much traffic, and there's something about the way the trees lean close to the gravel, like they're trying to hold on to you. Anyway, I was somewhere past the ridge where the road narrows to almost nothing when the truck started sputtering. At first, I thought it was just bad gas. Then it coughed, lurched once, and died right there. Wouldn't even click when I tried the ignition again. Just dead. No cell service either, of course. No bars. No birdsong. Just wind and gravel and the kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural. I waited around an hour, thinking maybe someone would drive by. No one did. Not a single set of headlights, so I locked the truck, threw on my flannel, and started walking. It was mid-afternoon, but the fog rolled in quickly, thick and wet, like cotton soaked in creek water. I couldn't see 20 feet ahead by the time I came to a break in the trees. That's when I saw it. A church, small, made of old clapboard wood, glowing like it had a furnace burning inside. Light poured from the windows, amber and soft, and I swear I heard singing before I even stepped off the road. Now, I've been to my fair share of Appalachian churches, both the ones with stained glass and the ones with folding chairs and leaky roofs, but this one, something about it made me stop and listen. The singing wasn't sad like some hymnals, it was joyful. People were stomping, clapping, hollering, Amen, and praise his name like they were getting saved every second. It drew me in. The front doors were wide open, and before I knew it, I was stepping across the threshold like I'd been expecting. The warmth hit me first. Not just from the candles and lanterns strung along the rafters, but from the people. Dozens of them, all in simple clothes, old-fashioned but not dirty or ragged. They smiled like they knew me, nodded. A woman handed me a cup of water. A man clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You made it in time, brother. The next sermon's about to start." The preacher stood at the pulpit, sweating through his vest. eyes wild with something between joy and fire. He shouted and whispered and moaned like he was pulling words from deep underground. But the thing that stuck with me was the rhythm of it. Every sentence had the same shape, the same pauses, like it wasn't just his words, but memorized breath. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was tired, hungry, grateful to be indoors. I slid into the back pew, leaned my head against the wood, and let the hymns wash over me. That's the last clear memory I have. I must have dozed off because I woke up in the same pew hours later. The singing had started again. Same rhythm, same clapping. The light hadn't changed. Still that warm amber glow that could have been morning or night. My stomach growled, and I reached for my phone to check the time. It was gone. So was my watch. I figured maybe I'd dropped them, slid under the bench. I crouched down, felt around. Nothing. When I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. Not locked, just sealed, like the wood didn't want to let me go. I turned to one of the women by the aisle and asked what time it was. She smiled. "It's time for the next sermon." That's all anyone said. I asked again later. Different man. Same answer. Almost time for the next sermon. They kept singing, kept clapping. The same exact song I'd heard when I first stepped in. "Oh brother, won't you rise and shine?" Over and over, like a record with no end. I lost track of the hours. I tried to sleep again, but every time I closed my eyes, I'd jerk awake to the sound of the preacher yelling, "Praise be." So close, I thought he was in my ear. My mouth was dry, my head buzzed. I tried to push out through a window, just old glass panes, right? But they wouldn't give in, not even a crack, just smooth, humming resistance. That's when I noticed the faces, not the ones smiling and stomping, the others. Way in the back, half hidden by the shadows under the rafters. They weren't clapping, weren't singing, just standing, watching, silent, blank. I met eyes with one of them, a boy, who couldn't have been older than 16. He didn't blink, just mouthed the words along with the hymn, slow and hollow. On what I think was the third or fourth day, the preacher said something different. He said, "It's been such a blessing having our new brother here. Let's give thanks that he's found his place." And everyone turned and looked at me. I didn't know what to do. I just nodded, stood up, smiled like I was supposed to. But inside, I felt like a rabbit caught in the brush. That night, I pretended to sleep. When the lanterns dimmed and most of the folks settled into their pews, none of them ever seemed to leave. I snuck to the back door again. I pressed my ear to the wood. No sound outside, no wind, no bugs, just pressure, like the night itself was pressing inward. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a noise, a break, something to tell me the world was still turning. I don't remember getting out. That's the worst part. One moment I was standing in that chapel, my face cold from the glass. The next, I was lying in the gravel where my truck had broken down, hands scraped, clothes damp. The church was gone. Fog burned off like it never happened. My truck started right up, first try. I drove straight home and didn't stop once. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? Now, months later, I still can't wear a watch. Tried twice. Both stopped working at midnight, hands stuck at the top like they'd been nailed there. And sometimes, when I do manage to fall asleep, I wake up with that revival song in my mouth, humming it through cracked lips, always at midnight, always with that last line echoing, "Brother, won't you rise and shine?" I don't go near Flint's Crossing anymore, but I know they're still singing. Story 6. The Pew That Grew Warm. I was 16 when I started cleaning the old Baptist chapel off Willow's Bend Road. My uncle knew the deacon, and they needed someone cheap to mop, dust, and keep cobwebs from building up in the corners. It was quiet work, peaceful. I liked it better than my other summer jobs, where folks hovered over your shoulder and gave you looks when you stopped for a sip of water. At the chapel, nobody watched. Nobody bothered me. Just me, the creak of pine floors, and the sun through stained glass. I brought a little transistor radio sometimes, but most days I just worked in silence. It felt more right that way. The church hadn't had regular services in years by the time I got there. They still opened it up once a month for weddings or the occasional homecoming revival, but mostly it sat empty, the kind of place time forgets. Dust settled quickly on everything but the pulpit, which someone still wiped down each week, though I never saw who. There were 24 pews, 12 on each side, all old but sturdy, dark oak with hymnals tucked in behind. My job was to clean every surface, especially the seats, the kind of work that keeps your mind quiet. But there was one pew, third row from the back, on the right, that never needed cleaning. No matter how long it had been since I dusted, that pew stayed spotless, like someone had just stood up and stepped away. Even in winter, when the whole place stayed cold enough to see your breath, that one pew was warm. I noticed it early on, just brushing my hand across the wood as I worked. At first, I figured maybe it caught some angle of sunlight better than the rest, but it didn't. The windows were up high, and the shadows inside didn't shift much. Still, I didn't think too hard about it. Old wood holds heat, I told myself. Or maybe some kind of draft came through the walls, funny. I had explanations, the kind you reach for before your mind wanders too far into the dark. But the warmth wasn't the only thing. That pew, unlike the others, creaked differently. Most of the pews groaned low when you leaned on them, but that one had a sound like weight settling. Subtle, measured, like someone shifting their position just slightly. I'd walk past it with my mop, and sometimes, just as I reached the altar, I'd hear it behind me, that faint shift, that wood sound that only comes from flesh against timber. I'd turn, expecting to see the preacher come in early, or one of the old ladies from the deacon board stopping in, but it was always empty. One evening, about a month into the job, I stayed late. I'd been scrubbing the windows with vinegar and water, trying to get the dead fly streaks off before the morning crowd came for some women's prayer group. The sun had already dipped below the ridge, and the only light came from the wall sconces I'd clicked on by the front doors. I was crouched under the window with a rag in hand when I heard it, breathing, slow, deep, like someone asleep. It was coming from the pew. I stood real still, heart racing. Every instinct told me not to look, just grab my bag and leave. But I turned anyway. The pew was still empty, but I saw the seat bow down, smooth and quiet, like someone had just risen to their feet. My skin went cold, the air didn't move, and for half a second, just before my vision caught up to the moment, I swear to God, I saw a figure. Not clearly, not face or clothes, just the outline of a man, right where the warmth always was. Then it was gone. I backed away, hands shaking, and dropped the rag. There, burned faintly into the wood, was the shape of two palms pressed flat on either side of the pew, and between them the indent of thighs, not carved, not stained, burned in, but only visible in that moment like a trick of light and shadow. I blinked, and it faded. I didn't clean the rest of the windows. I just grabbed my things and walked out, locking the door behind me without even flipping off the lights. I didn't go back the next day. I called my uncle and told him I was done. Didn't explain why. He didn't ask much. Just sighed and said he figured I'd last longer than the last kid. I didn't know there had been a last kid. For a long time, I tried to forget about it. Time has a way of sanding down the edges of memory, and I let myself believe I'd just been tired, stressed, saw something that wasn't there. 2 years later, they tore the church down, said it was falling apart, that keeping it up wasn't worth the county budget. I read about it in the Gazette. Saw the photo of the steeple half collapsed, ivy choking the foundation. But what caught my attention wasn't the article, it was the name of the man who ran the bulldozer. Died in his sleep that very night. I am 48 years old, healthy, no known conditions. Found by his wife the next morning, peaceful as anything. Except his hands were clasped on his chest, like in prayer. Nobody else thought much of it, just one of those things. But I did, because I remembered that pew. I remembered the warmth, the breath, the seat bowing under the weight of something unseen, something to watch. And sometimes now, when I visit other churches, weddings, funerals, the occasional Christmas service, I make a point to walk the aisles. Quiet, like I'm looking for a seat. But I'm not. I'm feeling, running my hand across the backs. The wood. Every now and then I find one that's just a little warmer than the others, and I don't sit there. I never sit there. Story 7, The Night Sermon in the Fog. Back in the summer of '89, I took to hiking alone more than I probably should have. I was 24, just out of school, and trying to get my head right after my mom passed. I liked the silence. The way the mountains held you. The trails around High Hollow weren't popular then, not even marked properly, just old timber roads and deer paths that locals barely used anymore. I packed light, had a topo map, and planned to be out no more than a day. I told my uncle I'd be back by dark. I didn't think I'd need to leave a note. The weather was clear when I started, sky so blue it felt fake. But sometime in the late afternoon, that changed. The fog came fast. It started low, creeping through the brush like spilled milk. I kept walking, thinking it'd lift, but the further I went, the thicker it got. By the time I realized I was off trail, I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. I should have stopped. Set up a fire, waiting for it out. But I was stubborn and didn't want to admit I was lost. That's when I heard him, the preacher. His voice came soft at first, tucked under the wind. I stopped walking, trying to listen. It was the cadence that caught me. Too even. No cough, no pause. Just smooth, rounded syllables echoing through the trees like a tape someone forgot to stop. I figured maybe I was close to a service, maybe a little country chapel out here holding night revival. I didn't think much of it at first, just followed the sound. It took me a long while, but I finally came to a clearing. There, nestled low in the trees like it had sunk into the dirt, was a small white church. Clapboard siding, narrow steeple, one window busted near the top. The place looked like it hadn't seen a paintbrush in decades, but inside, it was lit. Lantern light, soft and golden, flickering behind thick panes of glass. The windows were fogged from the inside, the kind of grime that comes from years of sweat and candle smoke. Still, I could make out shapes, rows of people sitting perfectly still. Nobody is moving. Nobody swayed or nodded like you'd expect in a mountain church. I crept closer. There was a crack between the boards by the side window, just wide enough to peek through. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. There were maybe 20 folks inside, all dressed in plain clothes, men in suspenders, women with their hair tied back. Not a single one of them looked up. Their faces were blank, like masks without features, eyes forward, hands on laps. They didn't blink. The preacher stood at the front, tall and thin, silhouetted by a lantern behind him. He didn't move either, just his mouth. The words kept flowing, smooth and slow, like syrup from a bottle. His voice didn't waver. It didn't sound like talking. It sounded like playing back, like a record on repeat. Same phrases looping with a rhythm that felt too precise. I felt something tighten in my chest. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you've stepped somewhere you weren't meant to. I backed away, careful not to snap a twig. But the fog had thickened again while I watched. I turned to leave and couldn't even find where I'd come in. The woods pressed close, and the trees looked wrong, like they'd shifted while I wasn't looking. I walked in what I thought was a straight line, but kept coming back to the same patch of moss-covered rock 3 times in a row. That's when I started to panic. The preacher's voice didn't stop. I could still hear it. No matter how far I walked, it never faded. Just that same cadence, that same hypnotic rhythm, like it was following me, like the sermon never ended. I tried to call out, anything to break the air, but my voice came out weak, swallowed by the fog. Every time I turned, I expected to see him standing there, but he never came close. Just stayed right behind my ears, murmuring that endless string of words. I don't remember how long I wandered. Time got strange. It felt like I was in a loop, moving without getting anywhere. The ground never changed. The air stayed damp and heavy. At some point I tripped and fell hard, scraped my hands bloody on a tree root. Just lay there, trying not to cry. That's when I saw a light. A single pair of headlights coming faint through the mist. I scrambled toward it like a drowning man. Broke through a hedge I didn't remember seeing before and found myself right on the shoulder of Route 46 just as the sun was starting to rise. A pickup slowed down and the driver leaned out, asking if I was all right. Said I looked pale as a sheet. I lied and told him I'd gotten turned around camping. He didn't press, just handed me a thermos of coffee and drove me back to town. Later that day, after I'd cleaned the blood off and tried to sleep, I went down to the general store and asked the man at the counter about the church in High Hollow. He looked at me funny, didn't answer right away. Just chewed his toothpick and finally said, "Ain't no church up there. Just that old preacher, far as folks say. Fella who never stops talking." Then he squinted at me. "You heard him too." I didn't know what to say, just nodded and left. I've never gone back to High Hollow, but sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and I'm driving alone, I swear I hear that voice again, just under the hum of the tires, same tone, same rhythm, still preaching, still calling. And I wonder if he ever stops. Story 8. Communion with the Wrong Crowd. I was 11 the summer my Aunt May took me up the mountain. She wasn't really my aunt, more like an old friend of my mom's who lived alone in a one-room shack above the switchback trails. Folks said she kept to herself too long, but Mom trusted her. Said a few days in the mountain air would clean the rust off me. I'd been sick, quiet, couldn't sleep through the night without seeing shapes in the corners. So I stayed with May, her place tucked in where the trees pressed close and the ground smelled like ash and wet stone. She was kind but always watching, like she was waiting on something. That Sunday, she said we were going to worship with the old crowd. We hiked up past the spring, past 2 huge boulders that leaned together like leaning heads. There was a clearing behind them, and in it sat a little wooden church, no bigger than a double shed. The air turned thick there, like it was holding its breath. Trees curved inward above us, canopy tight and strange, like it didn't want sunlight getting in. Inside, it was quiet. No organ, no hymns, just the preacher, tall, thin, face too smooth, standing behind a stump like it was a pulpit. The congregation barely moved. They stared ahead, blank and patient like they'd been waiting years. May squeezed my hand and whispered low in my ear, "Don't drink. Just pretend. The communion came in a carved wooden bowl passed hand to hand. No bread, no wine, just a thick, black liquid, almost sticky. The preacher said, "Take in the true body," and smiled too wide. I didn't listen to May. When the bowl came to me, I sipped it. The taste was rotten. Mold, metal. It went down like syrup that had soured. My vision blurred almost instantly. I felt heavy, and the air grew still, like everything outside had died. That night, I got sick. Sicker than I've ever been. I shook and vomited and clawed at my skin, trying to peel something off that I couldn't see. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that same forest, but deeper in. There was a long wooden table beneath the trees. People sat at it, pale, chewing something unseen. Their eyes rolled back. They never looked at me. May stayed quiet the rest of the night, just sat near the window, humming something slow and tuneless. The next morning, I woke up on a cot by the fire. She was gone. I made my way back down the mountain, weak and still shivering. When I got to her house, it was empty. No food, no fire, no sign she'd been there for days. But on the porch sat the wooden bowl, still damp inside, still smelling like rot. I never found her again. No one ever did.